cursed villages. In 1665, the quiet English village of Eyam was struck by a mysterious package of cloth delivered from London. Within days, the tailor who received it fell violently ill. Soon, others in the village began to die, horribly and swiftly. The plague had arrived. But what makes Eyam so terrifying is not just the deaths, but the choice its people made. Rather than flee and spread the sickness, the villagers locked themselves in, sealing off Eyam from the outside world. Trapped with the disease, entire families perished. Over 260 people died in just over a year. Their graves are still scattered across the hillsides. And according to witnesses, the plague left something else behind. The souls of those who died in isolation, forever trapped in the cursed village they vowed never to abandon. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're exploring one of the most haunted villages in England, Eyam. In the mid-17th century, life was hard for most Englishmen. King Oliver Cromwell had recently kicked the king and his royal family out of England and established a republic. This made some pretty powerful enemies, both foreign and domestic. For much of the population, daily life meant dodging famine, civil war, and of course, bubonic plague. By 1665, the plague had been in London for 2 years. As the hot summer sun beat down on the overcrowded city, the streets ran with blood and death. It seemed like every day more and more people were dying, piling up in mass graves with barely a whisper of a funeral dirge. With each passing week, more and more people fled London for safer, more rural areas. Many headed north to the small village of Eyam, nestled between rolling hills and whispering trees. They hoped the fresh country air would save them. Instead, they brought the plague with them. It started subtly enough. One woman showed signs of fever, and soon after, an outbreak of boils. But it was a third symptom that proved most telling: large black spots that bled into the skin around her eyes. Bubonic plague had come to Eyam. The first recorded death was George Vickers, a tailor who lived at the top of the hill on what is now called Vicarage Lane. He had recently received a package in the mail, cloth from London, which he began cutting up immediately. Within days, he was dead. The infected fabric became known as the cursed parcel, and when the rest of the village fell ill, it became clear there was no escape. To understand what happened next, you have to understand where Eyam is situated. From the 1630s, the village had become surrounded by a sprawling manor estate belonging to the influential Custis family. To keep the villagers out, the manor built high stone walls and hired guards to make sure nobody could enter or leave without permission. Now, this may not sound like a big deal, but when you're trying to escape a deadly plague, it turns out to be a big problem. On June 14, 1666, the village leaders met with the constable of the Custis estate to discuss the situation. The plague had already killed 9 people, and more seemed imminent. Fearing the worst, they asked the constable if they could break the manor's lockdown order so they could flee to safer lands. The constable refused. If the plague was to spread beyond the manor walls, Lord Custis would lose a lot of money. Peasants were considered property after all, so the villagers had only one option left. Led by the local pastor, William de Bure, they decided to stay put and fight the plague. But this wasn't some kind of brave rebellion against the ruling class. The reality was much more bleak. The villagers simply had no other choice. There were no roads out of Eyam. The nearest town was 3 miles away, and the closest big city, Derby, was another 4 miles beyond that. Both were directly across the Custis estate. Even if they hadn't been locked in, the villagers wouldn't have been able to leave. Over the following weeks, the plague ravaged the village. Every day, more and more people died. Still, the leadership decided to hold on. By August, they reported only 24 surviving families. By September, it was down to 19. But they remained adamant that they would rather die than submit to Lord Custis. But eventually, they caved, not because they wanted to escape, but because they had to. By the beginning of November, the remaining villagers were too sick to continue caring for the dead. So 5 men braved the plague-ridden streets and went to find help. No one wanted to come into contact with the sick villagers, so these 5 men were given supplies and told to stay in the town of Ashbourne until the plague had passed. They never came back. All across Europe, people were getting sick and dying. But nowhere did the plague take such a horrifying toll on a community as it did in Eyam. Over the next 14 months, 261 people died. Entire families were wiped out, their bodies buried hastily in shallow graves across the hillsides. Even more disturbing, many who tried to care for the sick also died, leading to accusations of a curse upon the village. Today, the village of Eyam looks almost idyllic. The buildings are well maintained, the gardens are filled with flowers, and not a single soul seems to mind sharing the road with tourists. But beneath the surface, dark secrets linger. Some say the air in Eyam still feels heavy with the stench of death. Others claim to hear strange whispers echoing near the plague cottages, as if the dead are still keeping their vow to never leave. Walking through Eyam, you can still see the evidence of the plague. The plague cottages are preserved exactly as they were left. One bedroom contains a half-written letter detailing the outbreak. Another has a clock frozen at 7:28, the time the family inside died. Some say that if you listen closely, you can still hear the ticks of its pendulum. Then there's the graveyard. It sits high up on a hillside overlooking the village, reached by a long, winding path. At first glance, it looks beautiful, a peaceful place full of blooming flowers and weathered tombstones. But if you look closer, you'll see that many of those graves are only marked with wooden crosses, not headstones. Most were never even given proper names, just numbers carved into wood. It's haunting to think of the lives cut short, the dreams left unrealized, the families torn apart. The plague took everything from these people. Even in death, they have been denied peace. Throughout history, there have been countless plagues, diseases that have swept across the world, leaving nothing but death and despair in their wake. But few have been as deadly or as long-lasting as the Black Death. Also known as the bubonic plague, the disease is caused by a bacterium that is spread by fleas living on rats. When the rats die, the bacteria moves to humans, causing fever, weakness, vomiting, diarrhea, and painful swellings in the lymph nodes. If left untreated, the disease quickly kills its victims, often within a week. While there were earlier outbreaks of the disease in Asia and Africa, it was in Europe where the plague really took hold. Beginning in 1346, the Black Death swept across the continent, killing millions. It returned again and again over the next 300 years. But the worst outbreak occurred in 1665 in London, when the disease arrived in a shipment of rats. Authorities tried to stop the plague by burning contaminated goods and closing businesses. But it was too late. The disease spread quickly, killing thousands every day. It was so bad that the government ordered all citizens to flee the city, believing that would stop the spread. But it didn't. The Black Death continued to ravage London for years, killing an estimated 100,000 people before finally disappearing. One of the places where the plague hit hardest was the village of Eyam. Situated just 3 miles outside of London, the village was a popular destination for those fleeing the disease. But when the plague arrived in July 1665, the villagers were trapped. Locked in by high stone walls, they had no way to escape the oncoming plague. Instead, they chose to stay put and fight the disease, taking drastic measures to stop its spread. One of the most famous stories from Eyam is that of the last 5 villagers who tried to flee. On November 8, 1666, they walked out of the village and toward the nearby town of Ashbourne. They planned to seek medical treatment there and then return to help the rest of the villagers, but they never made it. According to legend, on the way to Ashbourne, they were seized by armed soldiers and taken to a nearby cave. There they were locked up and left to die. In the morning, the soldiers returned to find all 5 men dead. They were buried in a mass grave, and a curse was placed on the village of Eyam. It was said that the ghost of the 5 men would wander the streets of Eyam forever, seeking revenge on those who had condemned them to death. While this story is now part of Eyam lore, there is little evidence to support it. Historians believe the 5 men probably died of natural causes, not foul play. Nevertheless, the story has become a popular part of Eyam's haunted history. Some say that if you walk through the village at night, you can hear the ghosts of the 5 men calling out your name. In recent years, rumors have circulated about a hidden plague cemetery in the village of Eyam. According to local legend, when the plague hit the village in 1665, the villagers were so desperate to stop its spread that they dug up the bodies of their loved ones and burned them. The remains were then buried in a secret location, and a curse was placed on anyone who uncovered the site. This story has persisted for centuries, with some claiming the ghosts of the dead villagers will haunt anyone who disturbs their final resting place. While there is no evidence to support this legend, it has become part of the folklore surrounding Eyam and the plague. Would you visit the village of Eyam? Do you believe in ghosts? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.